And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. I'm in Park City, Utah, joined by Sharif Abdel-Quddus, who is co-hosting from New York with the latest news from the mass protests taking place right now in Egypt.
Thank you, Amy. Protests have erupted across Egypt today in the biggest day of anti-government demonstrations so far. In an unprecedented display of popular protest, hundreds of thousands of demonstrators are gathering in Cairo, Alexandria, Suez, Mansoura, Sharqiya, and elsewhere. Intense confrontations are taking place with state security forces. Police are firing tear gas into the crowds and have begun to round up people on the streets. A number of journalists have also reportedly been arrested, including some who have been badly beaten. There are also reports that Mohammed al-Baradei, the Nobel Peace Laureate and former head of the UN nuclear watchdog, has been arrested in Cairo. The protests come amid a vast security clampdown in Egypt. Earlier, the government blocked internet, mobile phone and SMS services. Al Jazeera's correspondent in Cairo said the government had effectively wiped the country off the global digital map. The Associated Press reports that elite special operations forces have been deployed to key locations around Cairo, and Egypt's interior minister has warned of decisive measures. Arabic Wire news services have also reported that 1,000 activists were arrested last night and 149 have been charged with attempting to overthrow the government. Egyptian authorities have also arrested 20 members of the Muslim Brotherhood, including 2 of its most senior members. For the past 3 days, cities across Egypt have witnessed unprecedented protests against a 30-year rule of President Hosni Mubarak. At least 7 people have died and up to 1,200 have been arrested since the protests began. Human Rights Watch said Egyptian police have escalated the use of force against largely peaceful demonstrations, calling it, quote, wholly unacceptable and disproportionate. We go now to Cairo, where we're joined on the line by Ahmad Shokr. He's an editor at the Egyptian newspaper Al-Masry Al-Youm. It's very difficult to get through to Cairo right now. He's joining us from a hotel in downtown Cairo near Tahrir Square. Ahmad Shokr, thank you for joining us. Can you describe what is happening right now in Cairo?
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Well, the scenes right now are quite remarkable. Literally tens of thousands are taking to the streets amidst a huge security presence. I'm standing in front of a demonstration of at least a few thousand people who have taken over one of the main bridges in Cairo, calling for the ouster of Hosni Mubarak's regime. They have raised their hands, stating that they're peaceful protesters, but have been met by a shower of rubber bullets and tear gas. This is a scene in many different parts of the capital today, and this is happening in several Egyptian cities as we speak. There were major demonstrations planned to take place after Friday noon prayers today, and most major mosques in Cairo have been shut down by the government. Tahrir Square, which was the site of a very large demonstration on Tuesday of about 15,000 people, has been completely blocked off by security forces. Egyptians woke up today to find that their internet and mobile and SMS services have been blocked as well. And so Egypt is effectively disconnected from the digital world right now in an attempt by the government to prevent communication about the protests. Vodafone, one of the 3 mobile service companies in Egypt, has reportedly confirmed that this was done under orders of Egyptian authorities. And so protesters are, like I said now, all over the country on the streets. They're being violently dispersed with tear gas, and they're facing off with thousands of central security police. There's reports that journalists have been attacked. Al Jazeera has reported an attack on one of its own journalists. A BBC correspondent apparently has been injured. Reform advocate Mohammed al-Baradei, who the former head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, has reportedly been surrounded at a mosque where he intended to pray and then lead a march afterwards. There were reports earlier that he has been arrested, but as far as I understand right now, he's just been surrounded by security and prevented from. Of course, Baradei has been encouraging people to take to the streets. In an interview with The Guardian yesterday, he stated that the regime is on its last legs. Again, very, very strong words from the reform advocate, stronger than we've heard from him in the past few months. So the country is really in a state of upheaval people amidst a massive security clampdown. And this is incredibly significant because these are the largest mass rallies that have happened in Egypt over the course of Mubarak's 30-year rule. This is definitely the largest, the biggest political challenge that the regime has yet to see from the streets.
Ahmad Shokr, I wanted to ask you about reports that CNN, well, listening to Ben Wiedemann, he said his own camera was taken, was cracked by Egyptian forces. Also, possibly that as many as 20 people were killed in Suez. What reports do you have, and what is the significance of Suez in this mass protest in Egypt?
There have been violent clashes happening in Suez, perhaps more than any other city in the country, for the past 2 days. The last reports I heard were that I believe 5 or 6 people had been killed, though it's been very difficult to get information today because of the clampdown on mobile phones and internet. So I don't know what the latest is out of Suez, but there definitely have been serious clashes happening in Suez for the past 2 days. And like I said, the response of the security has really been quite violent. I think on Tuesday, when the demonstrations started, there were a few hours of leniency in the beginning, perhaps to gauge how big these demonstrations actually would be, and whether the tremendous amount of support that they received on Facebook would actually translate into bodies on the streets. But since Wednesday night, the response has been very violent. Police have been using tear gas and rubber bullets as a first resort. Many people that I know personally have been beaten, have been detained. Over 1,000 people have been detained. Journalists are being attacked. International organizations like Amnesty and Rights Watch have condemned what is going on. The Committee to Protect Journalists has condemned what is going on. And so the situation right now is really quite violent.
And Ahmad Shokr, there were reports on Arabic Wire news services that the Egyptian forces had deployed special elite operations forces across key locations in Cairo and elsewhere, and also that people were rounded up last night, including members of the Muslim Brotherhood. What have you heard?
Again, I've heard those same reports. It's difficult to get a very accurate sense of what's going on, again, because of the blockage of information. But I've certainly heard that leaders from the Muslim Brotherhood, which is effectively a banned but tolerated political organization in Egypt, which announced it would fully support the protests today. There are reports that their key leaders have been arrested in different parts of the country, and the security presence right now in Cairo, where I am, is quite massive. There appear to be central security, and there does appear to be special forces as well. Although, like I said, it's difficult to confirm these reports. And as I'm speaking, there is actually a very violent clash that's happening right now between the protesters on the bridge, who are being showered with tear gas canisters. I mean, literally looking out onto the city, what one sees are just clamoring protests all over different parts of the downtown core, covered with clouds and clouds of tear gas and black smoke.
Ahmad Shokr, can you explain what people in the streets, what are they calling for exactly?
Well, I mean, there's a variety of grievances that are being expressed in these protests. People are fed up about a lot of things. People are fed up about the emergency law, the state of emergency that has prevailed in Egypt for the past 30 years. They're fed up with corruption. They're fed up with unemployment and with the deteriorating economic situation of the country. There's been a movement in Egypt for the past couple of years to demand a national minimum wage, which currently sits at a pathetic 35 pounds a month, which is roughly the equivalent of 7 or 8 U.S. dollars. So there's a variety of grievances that are being brought to the streets, but gauging by people's chants and conversations with people on the streets, the unifying demand, the common demand that's being articulated right now is that people want the regime ousted. I mean, that's that's sort of become the slogan of these protests over the past few days, that people have been chanting over and over, that they want the regime ousted. They're fed up and they want a new government.
Ahmad Shokr, what's very interesting also is that these protests are largely leaderless. Can you explain who is organizing the protests, why it began on January 25th, which is National Police Day, and who is really at the forefront of what's going on? Who are the people in the streets?
Well, the people who initiated the protest call are largely a group of youth activists that have been organizing through social media, mostly through Facebook. They started a Facebook page to call for this demonstration, which immediately received just an outpouring of support. Tens of thousands of people signed up and expressed support for the demonstration, inspired largely by the events of Tunisia a few weeks ago. So this was a youth-led spontaneous movement that's being fueled by the anger of young people across Egypt at all of the things that I listed before. But what we're seeing right now is very interesting. We're seeing all kinds of different groups coming out. We're seeing workers. We're seeing opposition political parties who had at first been reluctant to support these protests coming out in full force. And so I think what we're witnessing is a transformation from what started as a youth-led movement, a movement of Egyptian young people demanding change, to a popular uprising.
Ahmad Shokr, describe the access people have to each other. Of course, you have just the mass protests in the street, but the whole issue of Facebook and, well, social media altogether, Twitter, the Internet itself is down, and yet there is a part of an internal system that can't be taken down, or the regime will be taking down the banks altogether.
Yes. The internet has been completely down as of last night. The state has been interfering with access to both Facebook and Twitter for the past 3 days, and protesters have been finding ways to get around internet blockage through using proxies and things like that. But today, I imagine it's very difficult to access the internet. I mean, it's been completely shut down around the country. I think there's maybe a handful of providers that are still operating, but most people do not have access to internet, do not have access to cell phones or text messaging. I believe the only channel of communication are in fact landlines. But much of what's happening on the streets right now has been planned for the past few days. Many people intended to join protests after Friday prayers, and I also think there's a lot of spontaneity that's fueling this. It really is a spontaneous mass revolt that we're seeing on the streets right now.